The feed looked terrible. It was a brown, sticky mixture of bruised vegetables, cracked grain, stale bread, brewery grain, and leftovers from a nearby produce warehouse. Mara Whitaker had paid exactly $12 for the entire load. Her neighbors thought she'd lost her mind. Earl Dawson stood beside the fence watching her unload it. "You're feeding pigs that?" Mara nodded. "Yes." Earl looked at the pile. "Looks like garbage." "It's feed. That's what you call it." Mara smiled. "That's what the pigs call it." Earl laughed. "You're going to make them sick." Mara didn't argue. She had already checked every ingredient. Nothing was spoiled. Nothing was moldy. The material simply couldn't be sold for human consumption. And Mara believed that if she processed it properly, she could turn waste into inexpensive pig feed. She just didn't know yet that one piglet would turn that experiment into a fortune. Mara owned a small farm outside Mercy Creek. She raised pigs, chickens, and vegetables. It wasn't a huge operation. It barely supported her and her 2 children. Feed was her biggest expense. Commercial pig feed prices had climbed steadily. Mara was spending more every month while earning almost the same amount for her livestock. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her accounts spread across the surface. Nathan Briggs, her farm manager, looked over the numbers. "We're losing too much on feed." "I know. Something has to change." Mara tapped the paper. "If I cut feed costs without hurting growth, everything changes." Nathan looked skeptical. "How?" Mara didn't have an answer. Not yet. The answer came from a produce warehouse. The owner had been throwing away truckloads of vegetables that were too bruised or oddly shaped for supermarkets. Carrots, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, squash, cabbage. Mara asked what happened to it. "We pay someone to haul it away. Could I take it?" The owner laughed. "You want our garbage?" "I want the parts your customers don't want." He shrugged. "Take it." Mara loaded her truck. That first load cost almost nothing. Then she found a brewery with spent grain, a bakery with stale bread, a grain processor with cracked kernels. Suddenly, Mara had access to ingredients that were cheap or free. But there was a catch. She couldn't simply dump everything into a pig trough. Some materials had too much moisture. Some lacked protein. Some spoiled quickly. And pigs needed balanced nutrition. So Mara started researching. She consulted an animal nutritionist. She learned how to calculate protein, energy, fiber, minerals. She discovered which ingredients could complement one another and which needed to be limited. Then she designed a small feed mixture. It wasn't meant to replace everything. It was meant to supplement the pig's normal ration while reducing costs. Mara started with 12 pigs. The first week, she watched them carefully. They ate. They stayed active. Their weight increased normally. No digestive problems. No illness. Nathan looked at the feed. "Maybe you're onto something." Mara smiled. "Maybe." Then came the piglet. He was a Berkshire boar born into a litter of 11. Mara noticed him immediately. He was smaller than several of his brothers. But he had an unusually calm temperament. He ate steadily. He grew evenly. His shoulders developed quickly. His coat was deep black with clean white markings. And he seemed to thrive on the new feed mixture. Lily named him Midnight. Mara almost changed the name. Then she saw Lily's face. "Midnight it is." The other farmers noticed him too. One afternoon, Earl leaned over the fence. "That's a nice-looking pig." Mara nodded. "He's growing well." "Planning to sell him?" "Eventually." Earl studied Midnight. "He's a Berkshire?" "Yes." "Good bloodline." Mara hesitated. "His sire comes from a strong line." Earl shrugged. "Then maybe you've got something." Mara smiled. "I hope so." But she had no idea how unusual Midnight's genetics would eventually prove to be. As the months passed, Mara tracked everything. Midnight's weight, feed intake, growth rate, body condition, temperament. She compared him with the other pigs. He consistently performed well. But the most interesting thing was his efficiency. He required less feed to reach the same weight as some of the others. Mara mentioned it to Laura Jensen, an agricultural specialist. Laura became curious. "Have you recorded the numbers?" "Every week." "Good." Mara handed her the notebook. Laura studied it, then looked up. "Do you know what you have?" "A pig." Laura laughed. "Yes, but possibly more than that." Laura recommended genetic testing. Mara agreed. A laboratory analyzed Midnight's lineage and genetic markers. The results came back several weeks later. Laura called Mara. "You should sit down." Mara laughed. "That's never a good opening. There are several interesting markers." "Meaning?" His genetic profile is unusually valuable for breeding. Mara frowned. How valuable? We need more testing. Mara didn't tell the neighbors. She didn't tell potential buyers. She didn't even tell Earl. She simply continued raising Midnight. The cheap feed experiment continued too. Mara refined the mixture. She improved storage. She added proper nutritional balancing. The cost per pound dropped dramatically. The pigs remained healthy. Her farm's profit margins improved. But Midnight was becoming the star. Breeders began noticing him at regional livestock events. People asked about his bloodline. Mara answered carefully. He's still young. Then one breeder made an offer. It was substantial. Mara refused. The breeder increased it. She refused again. Nathan stared at her. How much did he offer? Mara told him. Nathan nearly dropped his coffee. For one pig. Yes. Why did you say no? Mara looked toward Midnight. Because I don't think we're seeing his full value yet. Nathan frowned. You think he'll be worth more? I think we should find out exactly what we have. That decision changed everything. Mara arranged additional genetic testing. The results revealed a rare combination of desirable traits tied to Midnight's lineage. Growth, efficiency, meat quality, temperament, and breeding potential. His genetics could potentially improve several Berkshire lines. The news reached serious breeders. Then a major agricultural genetics company contacted Mara. They didn't want to buy Midnight for slaughter. They wanted breeding rights. Mara listened carefully. The representative named a number. Mara thought she had misheard him. Excuse me. He repeated it. Mara looked across the office at Nathan. For the first time, she realized the $12 feed experiment had led somewhere far beyond cheaper feed. But the company wasn't finished. They had another proposal. A much larger one. And if Mara accepted it, Midnight's genetics could become the foundation of a breeding program worth millions. She looked through the window. Midnight stood peacefully in the pasture, completely unaware of what was happening. The pig everyone had laughed about was about to become the most valuable animal Mara had ever raised. And the next offer would change her farm forever. The representative slid a folder across Mara's desk. Inside was a proposed breeding agreement. Mara read it twice. Then a third time. The number at the bottom made her stop. $550,000. Not for Midnight's mate. Not for ownership of the farm. For his breeding rights and a structured genetic partnership. Nathan stared at the document. That's $500,000. Mara nodded slowly. I can see that. You're going to sign it, right? Mara closed the folder. Not yet. Nathan looked stunned. Not yet. I need to understand exactly what we're giving them. Mara hired an attorney who specialized in agricultural contracts. She brought in Laura Jensen. She also requested an independent genetic evaluation. She wasn't going to let excitement make the decision. The tests confirmed what the first laboratory had suggested. Midnight's genetic profile was unusually desirable for Berkshire breeding. His lineage combined strong growth characteristics with efficient feed conversion, excellent temperament, and traits associated with desirable meat quality. But the most valuable part was his potential to pass those characteristics to future offspring. The company wasn't buying a pig. They were investing in generations. Mara returned to the negotiating table. I want Midnight to stay here. The company representative nodded. That's possible. I want his welfare protected. Of course. I want independent veterinary oversight. Agreed. And I want a percentage of future genetic licensing. The representative paused. That's unusual. So is he. Nathan nearly laughed. The representative smiled. Fair enough. They negotiated for weeks. Mara refused several clauses. She demanded transparency regarding how Midnight's genetics would be used. She wanted limits on transportation. She wanted health standards written into the agreement. And she wanted the farm to retain ownership of Midnight. Eventually, they reached a deal. The company would pay $550,000 for an exclusive breeding and genetic partnership. Midnight would remain on Mara's farm. His genetics could be collected and distributed through approved channels. Future revenue would be shared, and Mara would maintain control over his care. The payment changed the farm immediately. Mara paid off the worst of her debts. She repaired the barns, upgraded fencing, installed better ventilation, built a proper feed processing room, purchased equipment for safely processing agricultural byproducts. She also expanded the farm's livestock facilities. But she didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy expensive cars. She reinvested. The farm that had once struggled to pay feed bills suddenly had room to breathe. And it had all started with $12 worth of experimental feed. The story traveled through Mercy Creek. Earl Dawson came by one morning. He leaned against the fence. "So I heard." Mara smiled. "Heard what?" "About your pig." Mara looked toward Midnight. "What about him?" Earl shook his head. "They say you made more than $500,000 from the breeding agreement." "Still." He laughed. "Remember when I called your feed garbage?" Mara nodded. "I remember. Turns out I was wrong." "About the feed?" "About everything." Mara laughed. "That happens." But Mara didn't let Midnight become a celebrity animal. He stayed on the farm. He followed the same routine. Morning feeding, health checks, exercise, clean bedding, veterinary monitoring. The only difference was that technicians occasionally visited to collect genetic samples under veterinary supervision. Midnight remained calm. He seemed completely unaware that his genetics were now being studied by specialists around the country. The feed experiment also became bigger. Mara had discovered that discarded agricultural products could be valuable ingredients when properly evaluated and balanced. She developed a formal process. Produce waste was inspected. Safe material was sorted. Moisture was controlled. Nutritional values were calculated. The mixture was carefully balanced with conventional feed. Nothing questionable entered the ration. Her feed costs dropped substantially. Then other farmers began asking for help. Mara didn't sell them a miracle formula. She taught them how to evaluate their own available resources. One farmer had access to vegetable trimmings. Another had surplus grain. A third had brewery byproducts. Each farm had different ingredients. The principle was the same. Don't assume waste has no value. Determine what it contains. Then use it responsibly. A year after Midnight's genetic agreement, his first offspring arrived. They were healthy Berkshire Piglets with excellent growth. Mara watched them move around the farrowing area. Laura examined them carefully. Strong litter. Mara smiled. "Healthy." "Very." Mara looked toward Midnight. "He has no idea what he started." Laura laughed. "Neither did you." "That's true." More breeding partnerships followed. Midnight's genetics became increasingly sought after. But Mara remained cautious. She refused to breed animals simply because they could command higher prices. Health came first. Temperament mattered. Long-term genetic diversity mattered. She wanted a sustainable breeding program, not a genetic lottery. That approach earned her respect. The $550,000 agreement became only the beginning. 2 years after the original experiment, Mara stood beside the same feed storage area where she had once mixed her first batch. Nathan walked in carrying a clipboard. "Feed costs are down 38%. Mara smiled. "Good. Livestock revenue is up." "Good." And Midnight's breeding program generated another payment. Mara looked at him. "How much?" Nathan smiled. "Enough to make Earl jealous." Mara laughed. "Don't tell him." Too late. Earl appeared in the doorway. "I heard that." Everyone laughed. That evening, Mara walked through the pasture. Midnight stood beneath the fading sunlight. He was no longer the small Berkshire Piglet Lily had named. He was a powerful adult boar with a glossy black coat, clean white markings, and a calm temperament. Mara leaned against the fence. "You caused quite a mess." Midnight snorted. She laughed. "Good mess, though." She thought about that first $12 load of feed. The neighbors had seen spoiled vegetables and stale bread. Mara had seen nutrients. Then she remembered Midnight as a tiny piglet. Others had seen an ordinary Berkshire. Mara had seen an animal worth studying. Neither discovery had happened overnight. She had tested, measured, failed, adjusted, and refused to assume that something inexpensive was automatically worthless. The biggest lesson wasn't that a $12 feed experiment could make $550,000. It was that value often hides behind things people stop looking at. A discarded vegetable, a cheap feed ingredient, a small piglet, an overlooked genetic line. Mara hadn't created Midnight's potential. She had simply recognized it, protected it, and built a business around it. And years later, when someone asked how one Berkshire Piglet had transformed her struggling farm, Mara always gave the same answer. It started with $12. Then she'd smile. "And a lot of people telling me I was wasting it."